Welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest in long-term recovery, and I live here in Austin, Texas. We are in the middle of a new series. It's going over an article called The 12-Step Ladder to God Consciousness. It was written by Tom Powers Jr. If you want the history of that, go back to episode 1, where we kind of gave some of the background. But it's an attempt to look at the steps as a transformational ladder that one climbs in the recovery process, and hopefully it leads to a deeper understanding and an appreciation of what the steps are really ultimately there to accomplish. And my guest and leader in guiding us through this, Matt D. from Pennsylvania, and he is the archivist for All Addicts Anonymous. I said last week I was going to put the link to AAA in the show notes, and I think I failed to do that, but they will definitely be there this time. So if you want to get in touch with Matt, or you want to understand more about where All Addicts Anonymous is coming from, please see the link in the show notes. When Matt and I get together, we have a tendency to go down every rabbit hole that presents itself. So whereas we thought we might be able to get through this thing in one episode, this is the second. It's probably going to lend itself to a third, because we're going to keep going down them as often as we can. We got as far as page 2 of a 7-page article. And where we left off, just to kind of bring you up to date, is we were at the word of mouth program. Wilson called it somewhat the flying blind period of AA history, when there was a program, but it was somewhat vague, somewhat loosey-goosey. And at this point of the article, he's trying to solidify it, concretize it, get it down in a manner so that it would be more understandable, particularly to alcoholics who were struggling with spirituality. Wanted to make the concepts more available to them. Welcome back, Matt. It's good to have you here always.
Yeah, nice to be back. Thank you.
Okay. Let me do the word of mouth program, and then I'll read another paragraph or two, and then call on your expertise. So here's the word of mouth program. Wilson writes, "We admitted we were licked, that we were powerless over alcohol. 2, we made a moral inventory of our defects or sins. 3, we confessed or shared our shortcomings with another person in confidence. 4, we made restitution to all those we had harmed by our drinking. 5, we tried to help other alcoholics with no thought of reward in money or prestige. 6, we prayed to whatever God we thought there was for power to practice these precepts. This was the substance of what, by the fall of 1938, we were telling newcomers. Several of the Oxford group's other ideas and attitudes had been definitely rejected, including all which could involve us in theological controversy. In important matters, there was still considerable disagreement between the Eastern and Midwestern viewpoints. Our people out there were still active Oxford group members, while we in New York had withdrawn a year before. In Akron and vicinity, they still talked about the Oxford group's absolutes, absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. This dose was found to be too rich for New Yorkers, and we had abandoned the expressions. But all of us, East and West, were placing increasing emphasis on Dr. Silkworth's expression describing the alcoholic's dilemma, the obsession plus the allergy. By now, we knew from experience that the new prospect had to accept step 1 or get no place. Pretty accurate description of what was going on. So talked about the East and Midwest.
I thought you were going to touch on that one. Yeah. Well, you had mentioned in the last podcast about the absolutes were eventually going to appear. Of course, here they are. And as we know, Dr. Bob in his last major talk said that they still hold good, and I think that was 1948. So this is many years later. So thank God he made that statement because we've been talking about a program and the development of a program and the application of a program to people that have a specific need. The 12 steps, the original program came out of the absolutes and their experience of working the absolutes. In a way, the New Yorkers were still working with the absolutes, if you will, but now in a new adapted version in which was applicable to them. And it was a thing they were less likely to stub their toes on. Of course, Bill talks about that here. Maybe he gets to it a little bit later, but the idea of the steps was to take the power and spiritual action of these 6 unwritten actions, spiritual actions, and to make them applicable to the alcoholic. And I think this is a providential thing. You've got these 2 types. You've got the Dr. Bob type and you have a Bill Wilson type. They're in very different parts of the country. People's relationship to God were very different in these different parts of the country. Yep. And here's this program being spiritually, if you will, rolled out to these individuals. And there are programs developing that's going to be powerful enough that will be applicable to both groups without unnecessarily sending anybody out the door, if you will, because of being offended. So a kind of a beautiful thing is happening here from a spiritual standpoint, that this program is being developed to these 2 groups at the same time. And of course, we come out with the 12 steps. And fortunately, again, we come out with statements from Dr. Bob that say that the absolutes still hold true, right?
Right. And you come out with statements from Bill Wilson, which opens the door wider for people to come through.
Yeah, exactly. You do. Of course, you get that when you get statements like God as you understand him, the removal of things like, having to do this thing on your knees. And then the biggest of all, which this we'll get to later, is where it starts out with the introduction of the steps, offering them as suggestions.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bill tried to provide a softer, easier way. And in a good sense. I don't mean that critically. Yeah.
Yes. What you have is a tension between 2 dynamics.
Yeah.
Without that tension, you really get nowhere.
Right.
All right. It's like 2 sides of a scissors. You just can't cut through anything without having both those sides. You need them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good orientation for plowing on. We're reading here, I think, from the AA Comes of Age. This is where Wilson is kind of writing this, and Tom Powers had a big hand in editing this and some other stuff. So this particular evening, Wilson speaking, as my mind ran over these developments, it seemed to me that the program was still not definite enough. It might be a long time before readers of the book in distant places and lands could be personally contacted. Therefore, our literature would have to be as clear and comprehensive as possible. Our steps would have to be more explicit. There must not be a single loophole through which the rationalizing alcoholic could wiggle out. Maybe our 6 chunks of truth should be broken up into smaller pieces. Thus, we could better get the distant reader over the barrel, and at the same time, we might be able to broaden and deepen the spiritual implications of our whole presentation. So far as I can remember, this was all I had in mind when the writing began. So his intention.
Yeah, again, here's that famous phrase I consider famous, is this thing where there's no single loophole through which the rationalizing alcoholic could wiggle out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this is a mention of the development of the program. Again, we talked about other programs, regenerative programs. You have, the 10 Commandments and whatever it may be. In this particular case, this is a program being given to people with an unbelievable ability towards self-deception, right? These are people who
Where do I sign? Where do I sign on the dotted line for that one? Okay.
Right. So that has to be part of it. That has to be part of the presentation of this thing, right? Because that's what we're dealing with here.
He always came at this with the alcoholic in mind.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. And the condition of that alcoholic, which is beyond the complexity of just drinking too much. Right.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Alcohol is not the only thing that's cunning, baffling, and powerful.
Yes.
So is our self-destructive minds fall into that category.
Yes.
Okay. Finally, I started to write, pardon me. I set out to draft more than 6 steps. How many more, I did not know. I relaxed and asked for guidance. With a speed that was astonishing, considering my jangling emotions, I completed the first draft. It took perhaps half an hour. The words kept right on coming. When I reached a stopping point, I numbered the new steps. They added up to 12. Somehow this number seemed significant. Without any special rhyme or reason, I connected them with the 12 apostles. So I think when I look back on this, Wilson is employing guidance. He's asking for guidance when he sits down to approach this task.
Yes, very much. I mean, this is a description of the Oxford group's, openness towards the guidance of God, where you sit with a piece of paper. I mean, here he is with a piece of paper and a pencil. He's trying to carry out God's will. We had said before, we talked about the spiritual experience that he had had, mm-hmm. and that the experience was given to him not just to set his own life right, but that it was given to him as a conduit towards a movement or society of other people who are in turn helping one another get their lives right. And here he is carrying out that task. Right.
Yeah.
And we had said before, the spiritual experience itself is kind of a currency to purchase that action of God's will. That's what's happening actually here. He's given the experience. He's given, and it's actually in the steps itself where it says the power to carry it out. Right. And right here, in spite of his jangled emotions, he's actually carrying it out. And this moment, which seems so, if you look at it, here's a depressed person who's in the constant battling and fighting with other members around him. Here he is sitting there depressed with this piece of scratch paper, and this profound thing, which is going to change the lives of millions upon millions of people, occurs right there on the pad.
Yeah. And he has already taken these, I'm going to call them actions in his life, not to confuse things with steps.
In an interesting way, he has taken them without any reference to them being on the pad, right? Like he's it's almost as though you're going in reverse and taking a look, like what actually has happened here? Like what's happened to us? What have we done? And now it's being written down.
Right.
The rest of us are looking at it and saying, oh, what do we do?
Right.
In his case, it's what have we done?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he said, this is important, I think we'll get to it a little later, but steps 2 through 11 came to him directly from the Oxford group via Sam Shoemaker.
Yeah.
Which leaves 1 and 12 kind of up for grabs. And he's going to say later, I think this is where these have to come from, is Dr. Silkworth and William James. Those two are somewhat responsible for steps 1 and 12.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, and they're setting you up for the rest of the steps, right? And I think this is again a nod to the application of the actual program. This is the thing. I don't know. The Oxford group had their own way of introducing people to the principles. In this case, we're dealing with addiction, right? Not just sin alone.
Yeah, which they were not. They were not specifically into addiction.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And the application of this program is going to be applied to addiction.
Yeah.
They needed the input of the Silkworth and the William James.
Specific to this population.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Bill Wilson was one of the great men of our time. This is back to Tom Powers Jr. writing. Growing up as a boy, I regularly spent Sunday mornings with my parents at his home in Bedford Village, New York. This was 11 years after the Clinton Street days. Listening to him talk about AA, God, and a whole range of fascinating subjects with my father and other AA old-timers. Bill's personal presence made a tremendous impression on me then. At age 9, I did not analyze such things. Bill simply felt and sounded like a giant of a man. Those discussions struck me as high occasions. I can still recall the Wilsons' dimly lit living room with its beamed ceiling, the grown-ups in the middle of the room, Bill often standing by the huge floor radiator which gave off a great blast of hot air in cold weather, as did Bill probably, and us kids off to one side in the corner. Fragments of those conversations have remained with me all through the intervening years. He was a witness to history in the making.
Yeah, he was. I mean, he first, he had experiences of his father's drinking, days, and then, actually meeting. These individuals were like family to him.
Yeah.
Lois was literally like a grandmother to him. And he had gone through an experience where his own family had been busted up. His mother had gone, run off in one direction, and the dad's hanging on to AA for his dear life. In the meantime, this whole network of people inside AA and at some point to be called Al-Anon, they're like, all part of a family unit. Tom Jr. always described AA in that way as an actual family, as though they were almost like a matriarch and patriarch of this whole thing is Dr. Bob and Annie and Lois and Bill. It was like a family. So he's out as a child fishing at the Wilson family farm in Vermont with Howard Wilson. And
now, Howard Wilson, you mentioned him last time, and I should have asked you. Educate us on Howard Wilson.
That's Howard. Howard Wilson was Bill Wilson's cousin.
Ah, never heard of him.
Yeah, he himself got into AA too. I'm sure alcoholism ran through the Wilson family. But it's just this was a whole close-knit family network. And at one point, I believe they were considering Tom Jr. to be kind of a face. And I don't mean to say a face because we're anonymous here. But they were considering him to be an integral part of helping with the founding of Alateen. His aunt would be part of the role in helping found Al-Anon. They both kind of hit the side of the bowl and didn't make it. But that's the point here, is that this is a close family thing. And Tom Jr., as young as age 9, is being introduced to AA through these, to us, program giants or heroes,
Yeah. But he had to go out and fall on his face before he could really come back.
Yeah.
And adopt it for himself.
I've seen this a number of times. It's a very peculiar and difficult thing to be introduced to these principles before you actually are fully able to apply them in the way that an addict would have to.
You could get them intellectually, but not from the heart.
Yeah, not in the way that would come to a person after being thoroughly squeezed, right?
Go get yourself squeezed.
That's a whole different kind of urgency.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And a whole different kind of urgency behind learning.
Right.
Yeah.
And when I'm listening to somebody, if they only have the academic knowledge and are not bringing the experiential knowledge, I'm suspicious because a huge part is missing.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And it's like we talk about the language of the heart. I personally think the language of the heart is the language of suffering.
Right.
And it's like, that's why you can pick up like Man's Search for Meaning or something outside of it, out of AA. And you're like, this person is speaking the language of the heart, and you know it.
That's right.
You could meet those individuals at a bus stop, never tell them you're an addict, and have a conversation. And it might as well be an AA meeting. What's the difference?
That's right. They don't pass the basket, but, We're not the only route to this thing, but we need to understand what that route is. And that's what I think this article does a nice job of explaining to people.
Yes.
To stop worshiping the steps, start doing them.
Yes.
Okay, let's go on here if we can. In and around AA, there are hundreds and thousands who can witness more vividly than I to Bill's stature. He was a simply terrific human being, but he was not great enough to put together the 12 steps. They could only have come from inspiration, from the inbreathing of a spirit greater than Bill, greater than the AA movement, more intelligent than the smartest or best mere person or group of persons who ever existed. Bill prepared for what happened immediately beforehand when he relaxed and asked for guidance. In a large sense, his whole life of the preceding 3 years was a preparation for that moment. The surrender to God in Towns Hospital, the recovery from alcoholism, the heroic sacrifice of round-the-clock service to other drunks with no thought of personal gain, the midwifing of the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. So something was at work within, behind the scenes, and Wilson was a conduit for it.
Yes. And I think that even though it doesn't mention it here, we're talking about around-the-clock service and midwifing of the fellowship, all that had happened in the last 3 years as a preparation. I think really you got to trace it back to Frank Buchman's experience as well.
Yeah.
This is a case what you call one fire lighting or igniting another. The actual spiritual experience of Frank Buchman, without a doubt, influenced. As we said earlier, it's impacted 90%, if you will, of the steps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's what precedes this thing. And then he has this, and you've talked about it, and more recently you've read from Begbie's book, but he has this very profound spiritual experience. And again, it's these actual experiences that are put into some kind of, we never use the word in the 12-step fellowship, but some kind of a rule. Here we call them steps, right? They're applied and put into steps and applicable for certain individuals.
Oftentimes at 12-step meetings, when the discussion is on the 12th step, people go immediately to service and bypass the spiritual awakening or originally the spiritual experience.
Yes,
that was in some ways the whole purpose of the steps and the ladder.
How do I describe it? It's the reflexive action that comes, right? If you know how you do the little thing with the knee where you hit it in just the right spot and the reflex
the little hammer
goes
on the knee in the doctor's office.
Yes.
I hit him back when he did that to me. That's why we alcoholics are special people.
Well, hopefully you're getting a reaction. That's the impulse here. The original impulse is the experience, the spiritual awakening. Mm-hmm. And it's just reflexive that you have such an experience that you go out and you share it, right? That's what happened first with Frank Buchman. He has this profound spiritual experience.
And what does an experience mean? Talk about that a little bit more for so people can understand it. What's happening there?
In his case, he gives this beautiful description in that book. There's 2 versions of that book. Mm-hmm. I don't know. One of them goes into a more profound, like a closer description. He says almost as from a medical standpoint, he talked about it's an unintentional nod to the Hindus, if you will, but he talks about this electrical impulse or current that he felt up and down the spine. There's a whole psychophysical science in Hinduism that gives the description of that. as the Kundalini, and I won't go into any of that here. But here's this guy has this unbelievable, profound spiritual experience. It's marked by it, and act for him. He feels he sees the suffering Christ before him, and he has a connection, or he is aware of the knowledge that it is his own wrongdoing, his own ill will,
right,
that is connected to what he sees before him. He knows what, just like in the case of Wilson, there's something he has to go do.
Yeah.
Right. So he knows he has to make this thing right. Up till that point, he had been suffering and sick, unable to work, to do anything. This is one of the reasons he's traveling overseas, is to try to kind of find a way to deal with himself physically, medically, if you will, and has this profound experience. Somehow he finds himself the next day telling somebody else about his own condition.
Right.
Maybe it was 2 days, I don't know. But immediately after, he's talking about what happened, and he sees before him the impulse of the other person, their desire to do the same thing with him. They start to tell him about the things that are blocking them from God, and how they need to go make it right.
Mm-hmm.
And it was off of that actual experience that it's what Wilson calls this chain of events, right? These chain, that it was struck, and it led to the actual founding of, obviously, AA. And you find this in the 12th step, where you have this spiritual awakening, and the next thing you're doing is you're finding yourself carrying this thing to another person.
Right. And we have a tendency to keep these things to ourselves, don't we? This is too personal to share with others. And yet, it was the sharing of that awakened in this other fellow the exact same thing.
I think you can go one of two ways, wrong directions with the actual experience. You can take the thing and use it, and it mentions that in this talk later on, but just you can sour out in an egotistical way and take this thing as some kind of,
aren't you special? Aren't you special?
Oh, I'm special.
Right.
And of course, Tom Sr. puts the kibosh on that, and he says that, the only people who have these deep, profound experiences, because the rest of us are sitting around jealous as hell.
Right. Yeah, if I had a burning white light, I'd get it too.
The only ones that have this profound experience are the ones that are so unbelievably arrogant they couldn't get it any other way. God has to crack them over the head with this kind of severity. Yeah. And it's no special thing. I mean, it's a special event, right? But there's no thing that's more special that one guy has it in this profound nature than another guy.
Not to take their inventories, but you could say that Bookman had that arrogance.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And sense of specialness.
Yes.
And so did Wilson.
Yes. Yes, very much.
Mm-hmm.
And in the one case where I think there is something, and I don't want to say it's special in an egotistical way, that making them different from the rest of us, but these were two individuals who were chosen by God to be the original impulse to spread this thing to a number of other people, right? Mm. So many of us are given this experience to set our own lives right, and to help those around us. But these are people who were put in a very profound position to help, millions of people, right?
Right. It's a weight that they carried. Yeah, with a constant danger of inflation. To me, that's Jung's wonderful gift to this. You got to watch yourself. Is your ego inflating once again? Yes.
When we talked about the tree and the actual vitality that flows through it, these are people who are surging with an immense amount of vitality.
Right.
And at any point, that vitality could be used as their own undoing.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's reflected in the AA Big Book, where they start to make this major deal about resentment. You're like, here we are. This is a program for alcoholics and the problem of alcohol. And all you want to talk about for pages is about resentment. What the hell is this all about?
Right.
And I think it's because it's the first time you put the plug in the jug. It's the first time you have a certain kind of vitality that isn't being constantly used to let the soul out, if you will, in the experience of alcoholic oblivion. And now all of a sudden you're sitting on a hotbed of actual strength that you didn't have. You're so used to being in this weakened state for so long. And it's like, what are you going to do with all of that strength? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to hate your neighbor. That's probably the first thing you're going to do is to use it towards hating everybody around you who, if you ever were bothered by, all you got to do is take a couple of drinks and they're fine. Life is fine. All is fine, for temporarily fine, that is. Yeah. And this is a whole program in dealing. I got this early on and I think from some of these individuals is that this is a whole program in dealing with power, right? Like that's what you are dealing with here. You talk about powerlessness in the very beginning,
right?
But you turn your will and life over to God and you start to seriously look at your character defects and work on them. You're going to be given strength that you didn't have before.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at this program as given in the big book, you see it's trying to protect that in you, right?
Right.
This is in a way, it's what I think. This is my own understanding of what a certain branch of yoga is about. It's like how to use your vitality so that you don't undo yourself with it. And the thing that they're doing is protecting it from veering off into character defects of one kind or another, and also putting it into practical use where you're helping another person. That's what this thing's about. That's the best way to protect it and use it, is to go out and help another person.
So delicate.
Yeah, it is. It's very delicate. And yet at the same time, you don't have to be very good at it either. You know?
Oh, no. Matter of fact, the more aware you are of how not good you are,
yes,
the greater advantage you have of accessing the power, because you know you need it and you know it's external.
Yes. And I was talking about the two different ways you could veer off. The one is that. The other is where you become the speech giver and you no longer have the individual contact. And I'm glad to hear you using this quote a couple of podcasts ago, but I love it. It's the Frank Bookman one of you can't administer eye medicine from a second story window, right? So you have to deal with the rough around the edges alcoholic with barf on his shoes, whatever that equivalent is, in one-on-one, in exchanging of this, sharing of this actual awakening that you're being given, right? You can't just, if it's just all speeches and so forth,
right.
There's really, that's the other way you can go off. And I hate to say it, but there's a number, you've been around a long time and I've been around, half that or whatever. You see these famous, so quote unquote, rubber circuit speakers.
Right.
And after 5, 6, 7, 10 years or whatever, they too have themselves serious collapses of one kind or another. There's a number of them I've seen since the 80s.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate.
Yeah. But it lends itself to it.
It does.
The program does. The way it's set up.
That's the understanding I have of what the word anonymity really means.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Maybe you never said your last name as you stood up in front of the thousands of individuals you talked to every 3 days. When I lived out in Akron, they said the early interpretation, this is just the people in the meeting, said the early interpretation was you were anonymous when you came into the meeting, right? You left all of your egotistical baggage and your identity with being a special person at the door. You were all even and equal in God's sight. And that's how that thing, when you get up there on that stage and you do that over and over again, it's hard not to take yourself as a special person.
Yeah. The advice I had from my first sponsor was give a talk once a year. If you're doing it more than that, you're becoming a ham. If you're doing it less than that, you're not sufficiently involved.
Yeah.
I found it to be good advice.
Yes. Well, Tom Sr. was, and I think personally, this is just my own opinion. I think he was one of the best AA speakers that God ever hatched. But at a certain point, he came to him. It was out of the scriptures. It just said, "Woe unto you, and all men speak well of you." And he said, "Oh no, I
well, I've never had that problem."
Well, I can't say that I have either. But so, yes,
yeah. But the fame, and the inflation, hand in hand. You just gotta watch it.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah, good point. The steps themselves cannot be explained except as the product of inspiration. They are a unique and precious statement of regenerative program for our age. Regenerative. Talk about those words. You don't hear that word a lot, and yet it comes up in early writings like this. Regenerative.
Regenerative. We were just talking about it a minute ago. It has to do, we're dealing with the power, right?
Power, yeah.
And that power can be played out in three different ways. There's regeneration, there's generation, and there's degeneration.
Okay.
Right?
A good rabbit hole. Take us down, Matt.
Yeah. No, I think it's a brief thing, but
Yeah.
anybody who is killing themselves with an addiction,
Yeah.
and they're doing it at the expense of the vitality that God has given them, they are degenerating themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
You degenerate, you.
Yes.
That's the use of that word.
Yes.
Okay. Degenerate.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes. Anybody who is in a sane condition in which they're not degenerating themselves, it's a place of generation, right? It's maintenance, if you will. It is to live where you're not being necessarily having your soul sucked the hell out of you, right? Not necessarily a bad condition to be in, if you will, but this program. And that's, I think, is a very interesting thing. The thing that separates, and this is just, again, my view, separates the 12-step movement as a program from a way of changing your life or getting help through a psychiatrist or a therapist or something, is that's a place of generation, right? That, you want to kind of set your life right and don't have this terrible drinking problem and have a job and so forth. And that's that. Right. Yeah. And that in itself is nothing, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But a program is radically different. It's radically different. It's going in a completely opposite direction of what you think would be common sense for an individual. If you objectively looked at an alcohol addiction problem, you'd say, geez, the thing that's a problem here is the alcohol. If the alcohol was out of the scene, then you've got yourself a good situation. Here we say, no, this thing is about something completely 180 degrees different than that. Like, you are to live completely differently. You are to do things. You're to go out, like we're talking before, in the middle of the night, go help some person who's got, barf all over them. This is a regenerative program. Regeneration is if you think about like where they have certain water that's used to flow through dams. Right, that thing can be dammed up, or it could also be let through and used to power different things, right? Mm-hmm. Regeneration is to use that power for higher things, like creating out of that power a new version of yourself, if you will, not from yourself, right? But almost in a Christian sense of becoming a new man or a new woman. And to take that and to actually go out and help other people with it, this is what regeneration is. It is to be made of something, of a substance that is beyond just this physical nature. It is to be part of something beyond this life.
It would challenge me to look at my life, not just in terms of, am I happy, joyous, and free, but am I bringing happiness, joy, and freedom to others?
Every time you come across a regenerative program, with the rare case where these spiritual days are well over, where there's individuals who are practicing this out in the desert alone, there is always, outside of that, there's always a fellowship. There's always individuals that are doing this thing together. Yeah. They have to do it together.
Yeah. But even the guys in the desert felt together.
Well, also, even the guys in the desert, thank God there were individuals who had written out their experiences, and many of us are still living off the inspiration of them. And they didn't go out there for that reason by any means.
No.
Yeah. Yep.
Nice. Okay. So that was a nice rabbit hole. Thank you. Their power to transform the lives of crazy, degraded, wrecked human beings is attested to by millions of sobered-up alcoholics. The 12 steps are the program they used, the set of instructions that put their lives back on the rails. But the steps are more than a guideline for rehabilitating drunks. They possess a far broader potential for remaking human lives. Alcoholic rehabilitation occurs not as the end result of the steps, but as a byproduct. The central aim of the steps is stated in the 12th step as spiritual awakening, not alcohol abstinence, but spiritual awakening. Sobriety is a byproduct of that process. Probably the most important paragraph in the whole article.
It is. And again, this is where you see shot through it things that were touched on in the Gresham's Law piece. But here, again, this is the place what makes AA more in line with the programs of the great world's traditions than something that's merely just psychological. If it's psychological, it is about alcoholic rehabilitation. If it is in connection with the world's great traditions, it's about spiritual awakening. In a sense, it makes it an uncommon sense way of approaching this.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, this is where psychology has kind of gone astray. I mean, it should be the study of the psyche of the soul. That's
yes.
what is,
yes.
in the name. The psychiatrist should be the doctor of the soul, but instead they've become chemists.
Yes. Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
And it's a very easy thing to to view it in that way. You see somebody who's coming apart. The first thing is, geez, we got to get these people together.
It is the first step. I'm all for it,
Yes.
Yeah.
But in a way, in a regenerative program, the first step is ego deflation.
Take them apart.
Yeah. And nobody would sensibly say that's how you start off,
Except my first sponsor. That was his view. Let's rip this guy a new one.
and ironically, that's the way that and we touched on them last time. That's how the Beatitudes start off. Blessed are the poor in spirit, meaning those who are poor in egotism. It starts off in that exact way. So do the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
It starts off with suffering. Obviously, you're never in a psychiatric situation say, let's see what we can do about some suffering here, right?
Right.
In order to get through the door of a regenerative program, you have to be squeezed through suffering and able to fit through, right? And that's what we're dealing with here. And it's not about alcoholic rehabilitation in any sense. It is something beyond that in such a greater way, which is spiritual awakening and spiritual awakening, right? If you are to do, the understanding is, if you are to be no longer addictive, alcoholic, crazy drinker, it requires that you are connected to God in a higher level of awakening.
One psychologist said something, I've only heard it from him. I've never been able to kind of track it down. But he said the origins of therapy in the old days, I mean, going back thousands of years, was they would squeeze you through a series of openings in stone, and they would get progressively smaller. And therapy was kind of coming out the other end, So when you say you're getting squeezed, if people would just pay attention to how life has squeezed them, it could open them up to a new dimension of understanding of our greatest gift is our past, Wilson said, right? That's the only asset we've got is the suffering and the pain we experienced and caused others. So to be grateful for it, I understand what you're saying. You don't want people to, inflict it on anyone else. But if you can help them realize what they've probably already suffered enough.
I think the grace that's shot through this thing is that you end up inflicting it on yourself, right? So
yeah.
One edge of it is very rough, the experience of what has been inflicted upon you. But on the other side of the edge is that something has been done to you. God allows something to be actually done to you through that process, and you end up being open, God willing, God hoping, that you're open to this thing. It's like the case of the beautiful sunset that comes from, pollution. It's like there is a good aspect. God has allowed nothing to be wasted. And when you set out to destroy yourself, you actually are preparing yourself unintentionally without any, conscious knowledge of it. You're preparing yourself for a program.
But so many people just don't take advantage of the pain they've already suffered.
Many times they don't, and that's the tragedy.
That's the tragedy.
Not to utilize suffering.
So the central aim of the steps is stated in the 12th tradition as spiritual awakening or experience, not alcohol abstinence, but spiritual awakening. Sobriety is a byproduct of that process.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
That's so key.
Yep, and it's the old thing where you're in college and you're shooting for a C in a class. You're probably going to fail. But if you shoot for A's, maybe you'll get a B.
Yeah. On that note of brilliance, I think we should quit. This has been very good, and we've made it another page and a half, Matt. So, our progress is slow, but we knew that about one another, didn't we?
Ironically, Bill sits down in 30 minutes and writes out the 12 steps, and here we are 4 hours into it, and we haven't even talked through a portion of it.
No, but we're getting closer,
Yeah.
Just stay with it. Stay with it.
Yeah.
We're kind of thick-headed. It can be a blessing in the end. It can be a blessing in the end. So these people who are shooting stars, we see them all the time who come in and, whoosh, oh, I got this thing. Whoa, off they go. Those of us who are perplexed by it, troubled by it, and then it has the ability to stay fresh and new. It's kind of that Buddhist beginner's mind.
Yes.
Is kind of a gift when you look back on it.
Yeah, it really is.
I had a sponsor who used to say, well, Bill, you're suffering in all the right areas.
Yeah, you can only appreciate that one later on.
Oh, much later. Much later. The man knew what he talked about. So that was good. Okay, Matt. This was wonderful as usual. Thank you for your sharing. And you got some unique experiences and perspectives on things. And I've always appreciated that about you and about All Addicts Anonymous. So if you guys want to learn a little bit more about that program and website, it's in the show notes. Hope you will check that out. And there's also a copy of this article. And you want to share that with some friends and such, I think it'd be well worthwhile. So, Matt, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I will see you next time. We will continue along the path of suffering and enlightenment.
See you then.
Okay. Thank you guys for listening. God bless and keep coming back.